The room did not go quiet when Sienna Blake sat down. It died. 12 people around my dining table stopped moving at the exact same second. As if someone had cut the power to the house, my sister's fork hung in the air. My grandson stopped chewing. My son Aaron looked at the floor like a man watching a loaded gun slide across the table with his fingerprints already on it. And Sienna just smiled. She was 29, dressed in wine-red silk, sitting in the chair beside me as if she had earned the right to be there. That chair belonged to my daughter-in-law, Emily. It had belonged to her for 10 years, not because anyone had written her name on it, but because she had paid for that place with night shifts, unpaid bills, hospital rooms, and the kind of loyalty most people only pretend to understand. I am Thomas Whitaker. 69 years old, I buried my wife Ruth, built a repair shop from a rented garage in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and raised one son I believed still had a decent man somewhere inside him. But 4 nights earlier, at 11:37, Emily had knocked on my back door in the rain, soaked through, holding one canvas bag and a truth that made me feel older than any birthday ever had. Aaron had been sleeping with Sienna for more than a year. Now Emily stood in my dining room doorway, pale and silent, holding Ruth's apple crumble with both hands, the same recipe she learned when my wife was dying, the same dessert she did not owe this family after what my son had done. Sienna did not know about the folder in the drawer beside my knee. She did not know about the accountant, the retired investigator, or the 2 ruined marriages tied to her name. I looked straight at her. That's not your seat. She gave me a soft little laugh. I didn't know families had assigned seating. I pulled the folder from the drawer. They don't, I said. But predators always choose the closest chair to the money. Then I opened it. Before I tell you what was inside that folder, tell me where you're watching from tonight. Drop your city and country in the comments. I read every one. To understand why that chair mattered, you need to understand who Emily Parker was before she ever became a Whitaker. She was not the kind of woman who walked into a man's life looking for rescue. She was an emergency room nurse with steady hands, tired eyes, and a heart that somehow stayed gentle after 12-hour shifts, watching strangers fall apart. When she met my son Aaron, he had almost nothing. No company, no office, no reputation, just an old pickup truck, a rented apartment, and a sketchbook full of home renovation designs he swore would someday become a real business. A lot of women would have smiled politely and chosen a safer man. Emily didn't. She saw something in Aaron before the world did. More than that, she believed in him when believing in him still cost something. When Aaron finally decided to leave his job and build Whitaker Custom Homes, Emily did not clap like a dream was free. She sat beside him at their tiny kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, a calculator, and 2 mugs of coffee that went cold before midnight. She asked the questions love asks when it is serious. How much is rent? How long can we survive without your paycheck? What happens if the first client backs out? Then, she did what most people only promise to do. She picked up night shifts in the emergency room. She packed lunches instead of buying them. She canceled a vacation she had already saved for. She sold her Subaru, the first car she had ever bought with her own money, and drove an old sedan with a cracked dashboard so Aaron could keep liability insurance on a company that barely existed yet. And when the first big job nearly destroyed him, when a client refused to pay and a legal fight dragged on for months, Emily did not run. She came home after 12 hours on her feet, took off her nursing shoes, and helped Aaron sort invoices at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning. I remember seeing her hands back then, red from hospital sanitizer, nicked from opening boxes at Aaron's little rented office, still gentle enough to bring Ruth soup on Sundays. That is the part my son forgot. Before anyone called him successful, before men shook his hand at business lunches, Emily had already paid the first price. My wife Ruth got sick 4 years after Aaron and Emily married. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that does not knock politely before entering a family. It kicks the door in, sits at the center of every room, and changes the sound of every conversation. The doctors gave us careful words at first. Treatment options, response rates, manageable pain, but after 41 years of marriage, I knew my wife's face better than any doctor in Cedar Rapids knew a chart. I knew fear when I saw it hiding behind her smile. Aaron was traveling more by then. Bigger contracts, bigger clients, bigger excuses. I am not saying he did not love his mother. He did. But grief frightened him, and work gave him somewhere to hide. Emily did not hide. She drove Ruth to chemotherapy when I was too exhausted to trust myself behind the wheel. She sat in waiting rooms with a book in her lap and never turned a page because she was watching Ruth breathe. She learned which blanket Ruth liked, which soup stayed down, which nurse could find a vein without hurting her twice. At 3 in the morning, when Ruth's pain medicine wore thin and the house felt too quiet, it was Emily sitting beside her bed, reading old mystery novels in a low voice, while I stood in the hallway pretending I was not breaking. At the funeral, I remember Aaron standing stiff and stunned, lost inside his own guilt. But Emily reached for my hand before the first hymn began. A man does not forget who stands beside him when the ground disappears. That was the day I stopped thinking of Emily as my son's wife. She was family. Success did not arrive for Aaron all at once. It came slowly. Then, suddenly, the way spring comes to Iowa after a cruel winter. First one good client, then 3. Then a renovation featured in a local magazine. Then a contract with a developer in Illinois that changed the size of everything. By the time he turned 41, Whitaker Custom Homes had 52 employees, 3 company trucks, a downtown office with glass walls, and clients who said his name like it meant something. Men who used to ignore his calls now bought him lunch. Bankers who once asked for extra collateral now smiled before he even sat down. I was proud of him. A father should be. But pride has a way of souring when you start seeing the cost. Aaron began telling the story differently. At first, it was small, he would say. I built this company from nothing, and Emily would smile politely from across the table, as if the word I had not just erased 6 years of her life. Then, he started missing Sunday dinners. Then he stopped asking Emily about her shifts. Then he talked about sacrifice like it was something only entrepreneurs understood. That was when I knew something in him had shifted. He was not becoming rich. Rich would have been easier to forgive. He was becoming impressed with himself. And there is a dangerous kind of man who forgets the woman who stood beside him when he was nobody, then starts believing the applause came because he had always been extraordinary. My son was becoming that man, and Emily, God help her, was still trying to love the boy he used to be. Sienna Blake entered Aaron's life as a branding consultant, which sounded harmless enough if you did not know how certain people use harmless doors to walk into places they were never invited to stay. She was 29. Sharp in the way young professionals learn to be sharp when they want older men to mistake polish for wisdom. She wore tailored clothes, spoke softly in meetings, remembered every client's name, and laughed at Aaron's jokes like they revealed genius instead of exhaustion. At first, Aaron mentioned her casually. Sienna thinks we need to reposition the company. Sienna says my story is part of the brand. Sienna understands what I'm trying to build. That last one bothered me before I even knew why. Because Emily had understood what he was trying to build when there was nothing to brand. No office, no staff, no awards, just bills, fear, and a husband trying to become somebody. Sienna did not love Aaron's dream. She loved the man Aaron became after Emily paid for it. Emily came to my back door at 11:37 on a Wednesday night, and I knew before she said a word that something in my son's house had broken beyond ordinary repair. Rain was coming down hard enough to blur the porch light. She stood under it with wet hair stuck to her face, one canvas bag hanging from her shoulder, her nurse's jacket soaked through at the sleeves. Emily had always been the kind of woman who straightened herself before entering a room. That night, she looked like she had used up every bit of strength just getting to my door. I opened it and said her name. That was all it took. Her mouth trembled once, but she did not cry right away. She stepped inside, set the bag down carefully by the wall like making noise would make the truth worse, and whispered, "Aaron has been seeing someone." I already felt my chest tighten. Then, she said the name, Sienna Blake. For a moment, the house went so quiet I could hear rain dripping from Emily's coat onto Ruth's old kitchen mat. "She works with him," Emily said. "It's been more than a year. For the next 4 days." She stayed in my guest room. She moved through the house like a woman trying not to fall apart in front of an old man who loved her like blood. She made coffee and forgot to drink it, folded towels that were already folded, checked her phone every time it buzzed, then turned it face down. Aaron kept calling. Emily kept surviving. And I kept watching the rain on my windows, knowing Sunday dinner was no longer just my birthday. It was going to be a reckoning. Aaron called 13 times in 4 days. I know because Emily never deleted the call log. She would stare at his name until the screen went dark, then set the phone face down on my kitchen table like it had burned her palm. On the 4th call, she almost answered. On the 7th, she walked out to the porch and stood in the cold for 10 minutes. On the 13th, she finally picked up. I did not listen on purpose. A man my age knows when a woman deserves privacy. even in another man's house, but the kitchen was quiet, and pain has a way of carrying through walls. Aaron did not begin with, "I'm sorry." That was the first thing I noticed. He began with explanations: stress, pressure, long hours, the company growing too fast, Sienna being someone who understood the business side of him in a way Emily supposedly never could. Emily closed her eyes when he said that. I saw it from across the room, and I felt something hard settle in my chest. Because Emily had understood that business when it was nothing but overdue invoices, cheap coffee, and fear. She had worked 60-hour weeks to keep it alive. She had paid for his dream before it had a name. And my son had the nerve to call that misunderstanding. I called Aaron myself on Friday afternoon, not because I expected him to confess. Men who are still protecting their pride rarely tell the truth the first time they are cornered. I called because Sunday was my birthday dinner. Ruth's family table was still under my roof, and I needed my son to understand there were rules he no longer got to bend. He answered on the third ring. "Dad," he said, too casually, "listen, I know Emily probably made this sound worse than it is." I looked across the kitchen at Emily's untouched coffee cup. "There is no better version of your wife sleeping in my guest room, while another woman is walking around your office wearing your attention like jewelry." Silence. Then he sighed, the way a grown man sighs when he wants his father to believe life has become too complicated for basic decency. "You don't know the whole situation." "I know enough," I said. "And I want you at dinner Sunday. 6 o'clock. Not 6:15. Not when Sienna finishes choosing a dress. 6. "Dad, you may bring whoever you think you're brave enough to bring," I said. "But hear me clearly. Under my roof, you will not humiliate Emily. You will not erase what she did for this family. And you will not sit at the table your mother loved and pretend loyalty is disposable." For once, Aaron had no answer. So, I gave him one. "Sunday, 6 o'clock. Then, I hung up before my anger said something my grief could not take back. Emily did not want to come to Sunday dinner. I found her Saturday night in Ruth's old reading chair, staring at the rain-dark window with one of Ruth's cardigans folded across her lap. She looked smaller than she had any right to look after everything she had carried for this family. "I can't sit there and watch him bring her in," she said. "I can't be humiliated in front of everyone." "Tom, you won't be," I told her. She gave me a tired smile. The kind people give when they want to believe you, but have already been hurt too badly to trust the promise. "You don't have to fight," I said. "You don't have to explain yourself. Just come. Sit wherever there's a place." Her eyes lifted to mine. "I'll handle the rest." On Saturday morning, I drove downtown to Aaron's office without calling first. I had not been there in almost a year, the last time. They were still unpacking boxes, still pretending the exposed brick walls and glass conference room did not make the place feel more expensive than it had any right to be. Now the sign outside read, "Whitaker Custom Homes," in brushed steel letters. The kind of letters that tell a man he has finally become someone other people are supposed to respect. The receptionist recognized me and stood too fast. "Mr. Whitaker, I don't think Aaron has you on his calendar." "I'm his father," I said. "I was on his calendar before he had teeth." She did not know whether to laugh, so she pointed me down the hall. Aaron was in his office with his jacket off, tie loose, both hands flat on his desk like he was holding himself in place. For 1 second. Before he looked up, I saw the boy he used to be after breaking a window with a baseball and trying to decide if lying would hurt less than telling the truth. Then he saw me. "Dad," he said, straightening. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for my son." His face tightened. "I'm right here." "No," I said, sitting across from him. "The man sitting there is somebody who learned to talk like success excuses cruelty. I came to see if my son was still underneath him." He looked away first. That told me more than any confession could have. "I know you think Emily doesn't understand what you carry," I said. "But that woman carried you before the world cared whether you stood or fell. She worked nights while you chased clients. She paid bills you were too ashamed to show me. She sat beside your mother when you hid inside airport lounges and hotel rooms." His jaw moved, but no words came. For a moment, I almost pitied him. Then I remembered Emily standing in my kitchen with rainwater dripping off her sleeves. "You built something real, Aaron," I said. "Then, you let a stranger convince you the foundation didn't matter." He did not argue, and that was when I knew Sunday had to happen. What Emily did not know, and what Aaron certainly did not know, was that I had already started making calls before I ever stepped into that office. The first call went to Calvin Brooks. Calvin had handled my books for 24 years. Back when my repair shop still smelled more like old oil than profit, he was the kind of accountant who could find a missing dollar in a hurricane and make you feel guilty for losing it. More importantly, he had reviewed Aaron's early financials when Whitaker Custom Homes was still young enough to need every bit of help it could get. I asked him one question. Have you ever heard of a woman named Sienna Blake? There was a pause on the line. That pause told me more than I wanted to know. Calvin asked me why. I told him enough. Not everything. An old man learns the value of giving people only the facts they need. He said he would look at what he could legally access through old vendor records, public filings, and invoices Aaron's company had once shared during a financing review. By Friday evening, Calvin called me back. His voice had changed. Over 14 months, nearly $225,000 had moved out of Aaron's client acquisition budget and into a small marketing LLC with a clean website, vague service descriptions, and invoices written carefully enough to look boring. Lead strategy, market positioning, regional awareness campaigns. Boring words hide ugly things. The LLC was not in Sienna's name. That would have been too easy. It was registered to her cousin, a man with no real marketing history, no employees listed, and an office address that led to a mailbox rental place outside Des Moines. Aaron had signed every invoice, not because he was stupid, because Sienna had made him feel brilliant enough to stop checking. The second call I made was to Ray Donnelly. Ray and I had known each other since the 70s, back when he was a young patrol officer with a bad mustache, and I was a mechanic trying to keep my first garage from going under. He later spent 26 years investigating insurance fraud, embezzlement, and the quiet little crimes people commit when they believe paperwork is too boring for anyone honest to read. Now he did private consulting from a small office behind a dentist's practice. When I told him Sienna Blake's name, he did not joke. Ray had a way of going silent that made you understand he had already started working before the conversation ended. I need background, I said. Not gossip. Patterns. That usually means you already suspect one, he said. I do. It took him 2 days. On Saturday night, while Emily was asleep in Ruth's old guest room, and Aaron was probably rehearsing excuses he still thought would work, Ray called me back. Tom, he said, this woman is not having an affair. She is running a method. That sentence stayed with me. Ray found 2 men before Aaron, one in Des Moines, one in Omaha, both married, both successful enough to be flattered, lonely enough to listen, and careless enough to believe a younger woman saw their brilliance better than their wives did. Sienna had entered through business both times. Consulting, branding, growth strategy. Words that sounded clean. Then came private meetings, emotional dependency, hidden messages, and contracts routed through people connected to her. By the time each wife discovered the affair, the money trail had already been buried under signed approvals and vague invoices. Both marriages ended. Both companies took losses, and Sienna disappeared before consequences had names. Ray sent me copies of public filings, invoice summaries, and one email from an old case that made the blood in my hands go cold. You need someone who understands the business side of you. The same words Aaron had used against Emily. I printed everything. Then I put the pages in a manila folder and slid it into the drawer beside my chair. Because on Sunday, Sienna Blake was not walking into my house as a guest. She was walking into evidence. Sunday came in gray and cold. The kind of late autumn Iowa evening that makes every window look darker than it should, and every house feel like it is holding its breath. I set the table myself. 12 plates, 12 napkins. Ruth sold serving bowls, the good silver she only used when she wanted ordinary people to remember. They were still worth something beautiful. I wiped the chair to my right twice, though it was already clean. That was Emily's chair. My sister Linda arrived first with her husband, carrying a casserole and the cautious smile of someone who already knew part of the story, but not all of it. My brother Frank came next, loud as ever, followed by his 2 grown kids, who sensed the tension immediately and lowered their voices without being told. Emily arrived at 5:52. She wore a navy blue dress Ruth had once said made her look peaceful. There was nothing peaceful in her eyes that night, but she stood straight, handed me the apple crumble, and whispered, "I'm here." I squeezed her shoulder. At 6:06, headlights swept across the front windows. Aaron was late. The door opened, and my son walked in wearing a suit he had no business wearing to his father's birthday dinner. Beside him stood Sienna Blake in a wine-red dress, smiling like she had just been invited into a place she already planned to own. There were no place cards on my table. Ruth had always hated them, She said family should know where they belonged without being instructed by folded paper. And we did. Linda always sat near the kitchen because she liked helping me pass dishes. Frank sat across from me because he talked with his hands and needed space. The younger ones filled in wherever there was room. But the chair to my right had not changed in 10 years. That was Emily's chair. It had been Ruth's idea after the first Thanksgiving Emily spent with us. I still remember Ruth patting the cushion and saying, "Sit here, honey. Tom behaves better when you're close enough to elbow him." Emily had laughed then, nervous and grateful, not knowing that one small invitation would become a place she would keep through birthdays, funerals, holidays, and all the ordinary Sundays that make a family real. Sienna walked straight to it, not accidentally, not after looking around for an empty seat, straight to it. She placed one polished hand on the back, pulled it out slowly, and sat down beside me. The sound of that chair scraping against the floor cut through the room like a match striking in the dark. Emily stood in the doorway, still holding Ruth's apple crumble. Her face went white, and Sienna smiled. I let the silence sit for 3 full seconds. At my age, you learn that silence can do work anger never could. It makes guilty people hear themselves breathing. It makes liars wonder who already knows the truth. It makes a room choose sides before a single voice rises. Sienna looked at me with that polished little smile still in place. I looked back at her. "That's not your seat." Aaron's head snapped toward me. "Dad," he said quietly, warning in his voice. I did not look at him. Sienna gave a soft laugh, light enough to pretend there was no cruelty in what she had done. "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Whitaker. I didn't realize your family had assigned seating." "We don't." That made her blink. I placed both hands flat on the table and leaned forward just enough for her to understand I was not asking for a favor. "This is not about seating. It is about who you are and who you are not." The smile thinned. Behind her, Emily stood frozen with Ruth's apple crumble in her hands. She looked like a woman who had been struck without anyone touching her. Aaron shifted beside Sienna. "Dad, maybe we should talk about this privately." "No," I said. "You made it public when you brought her through my front door." The room went even stiller. Then, I looked straight at Sienna Blake. "Get up." Her eyes sharpened. "Excuse me." "You heard me," I said. "Get up out of my daughter-in-law's chair." I reached into the drawer beside my chair and pulled out the manila folder. No one spoke. That is the thing about real fear. It does not always shout. Sometimes it just sits across a dining table in a red dress and watches an old man place paper between the mashed potatoes and the green beans. Sienna looked at the folder, then at Aaron. Aaron looked at me. Emily still had not moved from the doorway. I opened the folder slowly, because I wanted every person in that room to understand this was not temper. This was not grief talking through an old widower. This was not a father embarrassing his son because pride had been wounded. This was evidence. "For 10 years, I said, Emily has sat in that chair because she earned it when no one was watching. She worked nights when Aaron's company could not pay its bills. She sold her car so his insurance would not lapse. She stood beside my wife when cancer took everything except Ruth's dignity. She brought food to this table after 12-hour shifts and never once asked this family to clap for her." My voice stayed calm. That made Sienna more nervous than yelling would have. "And you," I said, turning the first page toward her, "walked into my son's life pretending to admire the business Emily helped keep alive." Sienna's mouth tightened. "I don't know what you think you have. You know exactly what I have." I slid the first document toward Aaron. $225,000, I said. 14 months, paid from your client acquisition budget into a marketing LLC registered to Sienna's cousin outside Des Moines. Vague invoices, inflated campaign fees, no staff, no real office, just a mailbox and your signature. Aaron stared down at the page. His face changed before he said a word. I placed the second document beside it. "Calvin Brooks found the payments. His number is there. Call him." Then the third. "Ray Donnelly found the pattern. Des Moines, Omaha. 2 married men, 2 companies. Same entry point, same language, same financial trail." Sienna stood so fast her chair struck the wall. "This is insane." "No," I said. "What's insane is thinking you could walk into this house, sit in Emily's chair, and nobody here would know you had practiced this before." Then I turned the last page toward Aaron. "Read the email." Aaron picked up the last page with hands that did not look like his own anymore. I had seen my son nervous before. I had seen him angry, proud, embarrassed, even ashamed, but I had never seen a man's face lose its story in real time. That was what happened at my table. Every lie he had told himself began falling away, one quiet piece at a time. His eyes moved across the email. You need someone who understands the business side of you. The exact sentence he had used on Emily. The exact sentence Sienna had used on another married man 3 years earlier. Aaron swallowed hard. His gaze dropped to the invoices. Then to the LLC registration. Then to the names Ray had circled in black ink. Des Moines, Omaha, Cedar Rapids, 3 men who thought they had been chosen, when all they had really been was selected. Sienna reached for his arm. Aaron, don't let him do this. He's twisting everything. Aaron pulled away. That small movement changed the room. For the first time since he had walked through my door, he did not look like a man defending a mistake. He looked like a man finally seeing the cost of it. Then he turned toward Emily. She was still standing near the doorway. Still pale. Still holding herself together with more dignity than any of us deserved. Aaron looked at her the way a man looks at a house after the storm passes and realizes the foundation he ignored is the only reason anything is still standing. His voice broke when he spoke. Emily, she did not answer. She did not owe him that. Aaron turned back to Sienna, and whatever softness had been left in him was gone. Get out, Sienna blinked. What? He pointed toward the front door. Get out of my father's house. When the front door closed behind Sienna, the sound moved through the house like a judge's gavel. Nobody spoke at first. Aaron stood beside the table, with one hand still lifted toward the door, as if even he could not believe he had been the one to send her out. Emily slowly set Ruth's apple crumble on the sideboard, her fingers trembling just enough that I saw the glass dish tap against the wood. My sister Linda was the first person brave enough to breathe normally. Well? She said, staring at the folder. Tom Whitaker, I have known you since you were 16 years old, and I did not know you kept federal-level evidence beside the dinner napkins. A few people laughed before they meant to. I looked down at the drawer. I've kept scarier things in there, I said. Mostly property tax bills. That broke something in the room. Not completely. Not enough to make what happened feel small, but enough for people to remember they were still human beings sitting around a family table. Not witnesses in a courthouse. Frank's youngest son, who had stayed silent through the whole thing, looked at Aaron and shook his head. Uncle Aaron, he said, that had to be the longest 6 minutes of your life. Even Aaron almost smiled. Almost. Then his eyes found Emily again, and the smile disappeared. Emily stood there for a moment after the laughter faded, one hand resting on the edge of the sideboard, as if she had not yet decided whether her legs could be trusted. Nobody rushed her. That mattered. After a week of betrayal, after 4 nights in my guest room, after watching another woman walk into my house and sit in the place Ruth had once given her, Emily deserved one moment where no one demanded anything from her. No explanation, no forgiveness, no performance of strength for people who had arrived late to her pain. Aaron looked at the empty chair beside me. The chair Sienna had left pushed back at an ugly angle. Then he looked at Emily. I watched shame move across my son's face. Not the shallow kind a man feels when he gets caught, but the heavier kind that comes when he finally understands he has wounded someone who spent years protecting him from the world. Slowly, Aaron walked around the table. Every eye followed him, but he did not look at any of us. He stopped at the chair beside me, gripped the back with both hands, and pulled it out carefully. Not dramatically. Not like a man trying to win applause, like a man handling something he had almost broken beyond repair. Emily, he said. Her eyes lifted to his. He swallowed. Please. Sit down. The room stayed silent. Aaron's voice dropped lower. This is your seat. It was always your seat. I forgot that. I forgot a lot of things I had no right to forget. Emily did not move right away, and I was glad she didn't. Because a woman like Emily should not have to leap toward the first apology, just because it is spoken in front of witnesses. She had earned the right to take her time. She had earned the right to let every person in that room sit with the truth of what had been done to her. Finally, she walked forward. Aaron stepped back. Emily placed one hand on the chair, then looked at me. For just a second, I saw Ruth in her eyes, not because they looked alike, but because both women knew how to stand inside pain without letting it make them cruel. I nodded once. Emily sat down beside me, and for the first time all evening, the room felt like it could breathe again. I would like to tell you that Emily sitting back down fixed everything. It did not. Life is not that clean, and marriage is not a broken chair you glue once and trust again by morning. Aaron apologized before dessert. He apologized again when people were leaving. He apologized in the driveway with his coat open in the cold, his voice low, his hands shaking in a way I had not seen since he was a boy. Emily listened, but listening is not the same as forgiving. She went back to my house that night. Not his. She slept in Ruth's guest room with the door closed, and Aaron drove home alone to a house that probably felt larger and emptier than he deserved. I did not comfort him. That may sound hard, but some loneliness is not punishment, some loneliness is instruction. Over the next few months, they went to counseling. Separately first, then together. There were conversations I was not part of and had no right to hear. Conversations about lies, hotel rooms, late meetings, deleted messages, and the slow humiliation of being treated like a burden by the man you helped build. Aaron had to learn that shame is useless unless it becomes action, and Emily had to learn that being kind did not require becoming available to be heard again. But that Sunday night, after she sat beside me and the family slowly returned to something like dinner, I saw Aaron reach across the table. He did not grab her hand. He laid his palm open near hers and waited. After a long moment, Emily rested 2 fingers against it. Not forgiveness, not yet, but maybe the first brick in a road he would have to rebuild by hand. Later that night, after the last car pulled out of the driveway, and the house settled into the kind of quiet that comes only after something heavy has passed through it, I found myself in the kitchen washing dishes by hand. I had a dishwasher. Ruth had insisted on buying one years ago, but after she died, I learned there were certain kinds of silence a machine could not help with. So I stood at the sink with my sleeves rolled up, rinsing plates under warm water, watching steam rise against the dark window. Emily came in without making a sound. I saw her reflection before I heard her. She had changed since dinner, though not in any way a stranger would notice. Her shoulders were still tired, her eyes were still red, but she was standing straighter now, like someone had handed back a piece of herself she thought she might never recover. "Tom," she said softly. I turned off the faucet. For a moment, she only looked at me. Then her chin trembled once, and she steadied it the way brave people do when they are tired of being seen only at their breaking point. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for tonight, for seeing me all these years." That got under my ribs. I dried my hands on the towel Ruth used to hang over the oven handle, the one I still could not bring myself to replace. "You were family before you ever signed our name," I told her. Ruth knew it. I knew it. Maybe that chair just reminded everybody else. Emily looked down, and a sad little smile touched her mouth. "I miss her," she whispered. "So do I." Then she hugged me, not politely, not carefully, like a daughter coming home after holding herself together too long. And for a few seconds, standing in that kitchen, I let myself believe Ruth was somewhere close enough to see the right person had found her place again. In the weeks after that dinner, Aaron came by my repair shop more often than he had in years. Not with blueprints, not with contracts, not with that polished businessman voice he used when he wanted people to believe he had everything under control. He came in looking tired, sometimes still wearing the same shirt from the day before, and sat on an overturned bucket near the back while I finished closing the place down. At first, he talked too much. That is what guilty men do when silence starts telling the truth before they are ready. He talked about counseling, about how hard it was to hear Emily describe the marriage from her side, about how she had felt invisible long before Sienna ever walked into his office, about how success had made him feel admired everywhere except at home. And instead of asking why, he had blamed the one person who had been there before admiration existed. One evening, he said something I still remember. "I thought I wanted someone who saw the man I had become," he told me. But Emily was the only one who knew what it cost to become him. I kept wiping grease off a wrench and let that sentence sit between us. A father wants to rescue his son from pain, but an old man knows better. Some pain is a bill that finally came due. Emily did not move back home quickly. She stayed in my guest room for 3 more weeks, then rented a small apartment near the hospital. Aaron hated that. Good. He needed to understand that losing trust does not mean waiting a few nights for it to come home. He hired an outside auditor without being asked. Every contract Sienna had touched was reviewed. Every invoice tied to that LLC was traced. Aaron personally called the clients whose budgets had been affected and admitted what had happened without dressing it up in corporate language. It cost him nearly $75,000 from his own account to make the worst of it right. He sold the sports car he had bought the year before and drove an old company truck for months. Nobody forced him. Nobody applauded him. That was the point. Emily watched all of it from a distance. She did not forgive because he cried. She did not forgive because he was ashamed. Shame is cheap when it stays inside a man's chest. She waited to see whether his regret could put on work boots and show up every morning. Only after 2 months of separate counseling, joint sessions, hard conversations, and changed behavior did Emily agree to come home. Not back to the old marriage, back to see if a new one could be built honestly. Sienna Blake did not disappear because she had learned a lesson. People like Sienna do not mistake exposure for correction. They mistake it for inconvenience. 4 months after my birthday dinner, Ray Donnelly called me on a Tuesday morning while I was replacing a cracked hydraulic line on a combine. I could hear amusement in his voice before he said a word. Your red dress friend tried again. This time it was a construction company owner 2 counties over, recently divorced, plenty of money, a little too proud of surviving heartbreak, exactly the kind of man Sienna knew how to study from across a conference table. She came in through branding again. Same soft voice, same polished confidence, same promises about helping him tell the story behind the business. But small towns and small business circles have one thing in common: news travels faster than people with secrets expect. The man's business partner used the same accountant who knew Calvin Brooks. One quiet phone call led to another, then another. Before Sienna could move from consultant to confidant, someone had already pulled the LLC records, the old invoices, and the pattern she thought she had outrun. The contract was canceled before she signed it. For the first time, Sienna did not get to leave wreckage behind her. I will not pretend I felt noble about hearing that. I felt satisfied. Not because revenge had become a hobby, but because sometimes justice is simply making sure the next person gets warned before the fire reaches their house. 6 months after that Sunday dinner, Aaron and Emily invited the family to their home. Their home, not mine, not neutral ground, not a restaurant where people could hide behind menus. Their kitchen, their table, their attempt at something honest. Emily made Ruth's apple crumble again. Aaron grilled steaks and burned 2 of them so badly Frank claimed he had seen better meat at a tire fire. Everyone laughed, including Aaron, and this time the laughter did not sound like relief after disaster. It sounded like family, remembering how to be ordinary. I watched Emily across the table. She was not the same woman who had stood in my doorway, holding herself together by will alone. She was stronger now, but not harder. There is a difference. Aaron sat beside her, quieter than before, listening more than he spoke. At one point, Emily caught my eye and lifted her glass just slightly. I lifted mine back. No speech. No big moment. We both understood. Family is not the people who sit at your table when everything is easy. Family is the people willing to stay after the truth breaks the room open, then rebuild it, scar by scar, chair by chair. And that night, every seat belonged to the right person.